member already, if you're not a member of the section for professional practice, as the recording just started, so now I'll do my pitch again. If you're not a member already, it's free to join. It's a great way to get plugged into other practitioners and graduate students in Division 17. And if you are a member, or if you're considering becoming a member, we'll also hope you'll consider getting more involved in our section as well. We have a lot of projects related to professional practice and supporting our practitioner and graduate student members that you might find engaging and enjoyable. And lastly, I want to remind everyone that there is less than 1 week left to vote in the APA and Division 17 elections. We have some great folks on the ballot, and we hope that you'll let your voice be heard. If you have trouble finding your ballot in your email, make sure to check your spam folder, or you can vote by logging into the APA membership portal. Okay, so now to receive CEs for today's webinar, you must stay logged on for 50 or more minutes. If you get logged off, sign back on as quickly as possible to avoid losing your ability to receive those CEs. Please note that participants must join the webinar via computer, laptop, or tablet and attend the full webinar in order to get CE credit. If you meet those CE attendance criteria, Dr. Richa Khanna, chair of the SCP CE committee, will send you a follow-up email within 3 weeks. This email will include a link to complete an evaluation for the webinar and request your CE certificate for your attendance. APA's Division 17 is approved by the APA to sponsor CE credits for psychologists. APA Division 17 maintains responsibility for this program and its content, and APA Division 17 is recognized by the New York State Education Department State Board for Psychology as an approved provider of continuing education for licensed psychologists. Attendees are responsible for confirming with their own state boards that Division 17 is approved to offer continuing education for them as well. All right, so onwards and upwards. I'm so excited to introduce today's presenter. Dr. Marlene Mayhew is a telehealth pioneer, publisher, consultant, author, trainer, and founder of telehealth.org, connecting with more than 6.5 million professionals last year alone. She is in a unique position to help guide newbies and experts alike through even the most complex of questions. She also oversees the monthly publication of 57 telehealth newsletters and personally writes from 12 to 15 new blog posts monthly, adding to her company's 1,250 telehealth blogs. Inspired by many mentors, she has also written 5 peer-reviewed telehealth textbooks and more than 60 telehealth-related book chapters and journal articles. She's also known for many firsts, some of which we might hear today. I'm very excited to turn it over to our presenter, Dr. Marlene Mayhew.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here. Now that folks have heard about me, I'd like to hear about you. Would you please, in the chat box, let us all know who your name, your city, your state, and your specialty. I take advantage of these situations so that folks can network with one another, and you might just see somebody ask a question that makes you think, I want to contact that person. So you can use this as a networking opportunity. While you're doing that, I want to encourage you to write things down, but make it as a to-do list rather than theoretical issues. I want to encourage you to make a list for yourself of actionable items, things that you need to do this week or next week, and organize them according to your time that way. I also want to just let you know that I am an educator. I am a psychologist. I am not an attorney. I am not giving psychological advice. I am not an IT professional. I am simply here to advise you and to alert you to the issues that are going on. I want to encourage you to proceed with caution and seek the advice of experienced telehealth attorneys before taking any actions that have to do with legal issues. Also, I don't have any conflicts of interest that I need to disclose. As you're typing things in the box, I want to encourage you to type in your number one reason for coming here today. What's your most burning legal or ethical question about practicing over state lines? If you get into billing and those kinds of things, I can't answer it. I'm just going to focus on practicing over state lines today. There's plenty to talk about. I want to encourage you to turn on your camera. Oh, actually, we can't do that here with this, but please write your questions as they occur. Ask friends and family or other distractors to stay away for this 1 hour, and then mute your phones if possible and lock your door. Our learning objectives are to cover the legal and ethical concerns often encountered by psychologists practicing telehealth, and then to apply strategies for addressing common interjurisdictional challenges experienced by practitioners, and to talk about principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how to include that in telehealth, because it's particularly germane to working with people over state lines. Now, the first point I want to make is that when you're practicing telehealth, all in-person local, legal, and ethical rules apply, and that also includes clinical strategies. If you are doing EMDR in person and you're doing that online, you need to be able to demonstrate, if ever questioned, that you have learned how to adapt those techniques to an interface. Okay. The fact that you do it in front of a camera doesn't mean that you know how to do it. Okay. There are very specific strategies that involve protocols for how to take an in-person service and bring it online, because we're in a completely different environment and there are many other factors need to be controlled. So you have to be able to demonstrate that. And that's just part of learning how to deliver care, and that would be over state lines. Now, your licensing boards are the parties that go into this kind of detail and tell you how you should do things. So the regulations for practicing over state lines are made by licensing boards, and I say that because many people don't know. They don't know who to go to, and they don't know how to think about it. Well, it's not the federal government. It's not your professional associations. They don't dictate the law. You see, the law is decided by is interpreted by your board. And I'll give you more information about exactly how that works. If you have questions about licensure, which I get almost daily, by the way. Hey, Marlene, should I do blah, blah, blah? I'm going to be in Portugal. I'm doing that. Yeah, what? You can't rely on me. Even people with all the expertise I have, 30 years of expertise, I'll be the first one to tell you, don't ask me what your board is doing. You need to ask your board. These boards are in rapid flux. Some of them are writing laws as we speak related to telehealth. Other ones haven't even touched it yet. Other ones are very, very tight in terms of their laws. You can't do this, you can't do that. So you really need to go to the board. I say there are no exceptions to this, not one exception to this, none. You have to go to your board. And I strongly encourage you not to trust each other, not to trust anybody else who gets in the mix. This should be a direct communication between you and your board, okay? Now, the state laws are so strong that they override all other contributing factors. You see, your board is it. You have to have this information from your board and you have to understand it. And everything else, even national emergencies, take second place, because if you think back to COVID, your boards decided who can come in and out of states. Many clinicians didn't know that, and they just kind of did whatever they wanted willy-nilly, but it was illegal. They were practicing illegally, and they were not called on the carpet about it. But now that the boards are getting more sophisticated, we are seeing more and more litigation come down where boards are calling people out on inappropriate practice. Okay. Now you might ask, well, which board do I have to deal with if I'm in two states? Well, whose board do I have to pay attention to? This gets down to what years ago I started calling the innies and outies, okay, like belly buttons. And I'll give you an example of this. In California, where I'm licensed, there's a law, the practice law says that I can receive the license from California and I'm allowed to practice in California. Let's say that's the INI law. Okay. The outie is I can't go out of state unless I have written approval from a foreign state. You see, that's the outie side. Some states only say, here's your ticket for practicing in our state, and they don't mention outside states. It's your job to figure out what that rule is for you, you see, and it's different across states. Typically, providers have to be licensed in the state where the client or the patient is located at the time of the service. So if someone is a citizen of California, let's say for me, okay, but now they're in Hawaii I'm not licensed in Hawaii, so I can't work with them, even though they are a resident of my state. You see, this is one of the many things that can differ, but for the most part, the service follows the patient. And so you can try to remember this as patient-centered healthcare. The care follows the patient. So it's contrary to what we normally think about with practice, where people come to us. So then we are the center of the universe in essence, but it's not that way online. Online, we go to them, and so it's the law of where their feet are planted at the time of the service that counts. Okay. So another way to think about this is if you're driving in Idaho, let's say you're licensed in California and you're driving in Idaho, it's not the California law that takes precedence. It's the Idaho law that takes precedence. So the care follows the patient, just like driving in this one instance, okay, driving law follows wherever your car is when you have this accident, okay? Now, the thing about SIPACT is that it facilitates the ability for providers to practice in multiple states. But that's kind of it. You see, after that, there are many other factors that come into play that is the responsibility of the clinician to know and to comply with. And that's the bulk of our program today. I'll be giving you 21 items that I've been able to identify as laws that differ across states, but I want you to know my list is not comprehensive. I just happen to be the only one that I know that put together a list like this. And actually, I'm doing this talk next week through my institute, telehealth.org, with Marianne Bernetti Atwell, the CEO of ASPPB, who's the group that actually got the funding to develop SIPACT, because they're concerned about these issues as well. The clinicians are not aware that they need to look into and comply with the laws of each different state. Now, there are 21 of them. I don't have time in the few minutes with you here today to cover them. We'll be covering them next week in a whole lot more detail. But the first one is the ability to practice in the other states. Okay, and the states differ on the definition of practice. That would be the standard of care. All right. What exactly determines the establishment of a professional relationship? Now, you note that this next one is in blue. I don't have time today to cover all 21 points. I'm going to name them and walk you through them, so at least you'll know what they are, and then you'll get my slide deck after this if you'd like. But the ones in black, I do have slides, and I'll go into more detail for you today, okay? Hopefully I'll get through them. So privacy confidentiality, this differs by state. So HIPAA's the floor, okay? But privacy confidentiality can be different state by state by state, particularly in states like California and Texas, where they're consumer protection states. So there are added laws on top of HIPAA that you need to pay attention to. All right. Informed consent, a very big issue. We have a 6-hour course on this at our institute alone, you see, so it's a very big issue. And it really is a matter for you protecting yourself as well as protecting the consumer. Continuity care we can't get into, but what I'm just going to give you the shorthand on these blue items as we go through. So that means if you work for a company, for example, and they're having you do shift work, and so, person A sees a person, then they go home, and person B might get another text from them or get a contact from them. Is that appropriate? According to some state law, it's not. You see, the clinician who takes on the person is responsible for the continuity of care. So you really need to be careful about that. Mandated abuse reporting, duty to warn, and practitioner reporting. We'll get into some more detail as we go. Emergency service management. There's a lot involved with being prepared to deal with somebody who comes in to a session and is having an emergency. You need to be able to respond as a first responder, because you're right there. You're the first, maybe the first person seeing this, and you need to know what to do for them in their community. You're calling 911 is going to get your own police department. It's not going to get theirs. So you need to be prepared to deal with them. And that, again, is something that we have a lot of other training for at our institute. Prescribing policies differ by state. Some of you may be prescribing psychologists, or you might be dealing with a physician who's prescribing psychiatric meds. You might be licensed in the foreign state that this person goes to. But if they're having a medical emergency, you call the psychiatrist on the case, they can't practice in the state where your patient is. What do? You need to be prepared and have protocols written out. And that doesn't have to be all that fancy. It could be 3 sentences. I'm going to do this, this, and that, right? But you really, if you're going to do this correctly, you need to have this kind of thing written out in a little telehealth manual for yourself. Okay. Number 12, reimbursement regulations do differ by state law. For example, during COVID, Colorado pulled back funding for COVID related services, including psych services, within the first year. And other states waited till last year, you see. So it's dependent on the state and what they are determining to be appropriate for their citizens. All right. So you can't continue to bill for services and expect payment if the state says those kinds of services have been stopped now, you see. Documentation, ownership, record keeping. In some states, the clinician owns the record. In other states, the patient owns the records. If the patient asks for the records and you don't give it, now you are not complying with the law. And there are many cases that where clinicians have been censured for not providing the record when they're supposed to, you see. And you may not know that because your state may be one where you own the record. HIPAA is another law that gets involved there. There's a right to access part of HIPAA that during COVID was vigorously enforced, where people were asking for their records and electronic records, and the clinicians were not giving them. We've written up a number of these in our blog where just the clinician gets contacted by a variety of parties, including the Office for Civil Rights, which is the arm of HIPAA that is the enforcement arm, and the clinician doesn't produce it. Well, guess what? Then HIPAA really comes down on you. The OCR comes down on you, and there are fines to be paid. It's not an easy thing. They also splash your name all over a page known as the HIPAA Wall of Shame. You may want to type that in. It's a good exercise for students. Go to the HIPAA Wall of Shame and just look at all the infractions that people get dinged on. It's quite the eye opener. Cross-state licensing exceptions. There are states that do allow you to come in for certain purposes. And so you need to know that. Or if you did go into a state under those conditions, you need to know when that stops because there are limits to a lot of those exceptions. So that needs to be on your radar. Supervision, telesupervision, documentation. Some states require 1,500 hours. Other states require 1,000 hours after licensure for supervision. All these requirements, the documentation of those hours, they differ by state. It gets wild. And it gets really wild when you're supervising somebody from another profession. Because when you're doing telesupervision of somebody, say a counselor or an MFT, you can't teach them your law for your state law because it might be different from theirs because their board is different. Okay. Boards within a state can differ in the laws and oftentimes do. Okay. Malpractice and liability laws. There are many. We just wrote an article on this. I wrote it this week actually on the blog. My blog is telehealth.org/blog, and that's free. It's free to you. You can go there. If you want to get some of these sent to your inbox, you can join one of our newsletters. Our general newsletter sends the 3 blogs out weekly, and that's free as well. But you can go and you can see that the malpractice insurance companies are regulated by the state insurance boards. You see, so they're not all the same, and so they have different limits. There are different rules for them, and some companies have waded through that. Some malpractice companies have waded through that for telehealth, and others haven't. So you really need to read your policies and understand them. Okay, continuing education we'll cover in more detail. I'm a little confused with this one here, but I'll come back to it. Cultural diversity, linguistic, we'll go into that in more detail. Definitions of telehealth and the registration process instead of licensure we'll get into as well. Okay, the first thing to note is there are 11 professions in our field. Many of us don't know that, and here's a list of them. So we are psychology, but as I was saying earlier, if you're supervising other people, they may have a different board in one state In another state, they may be part of another board that is 3 or 4 boards put together. It's sort of this patchwork of rules for people. So best practice is for you to be aware of your own law and have your licensee, your supervisee, go look up their law and compare the two. Right. So if you don't want to do it, or you do it yourself, but at least that's a good exercise, and you can document that they've learned things because they will note differences across the boards. It gets wild again. I remember in 2015, Georgia, for example, required that everybody at the master's level, the social workers, the counselors, the MFTs, get 6 hours of training and an extra 3 hours for the supervisors for a total of 9 hours. But the psychology board, 0 hours of training for telehealth. Same state, you see? So you can't make any assumptions about this. You really need to go look at each board individually, see what the requirements are. Okay. So let me just recap this about the boards. Okay. They can differ widely and they operate as fiefdoms. So states have rules about how their citizens will be governed. So there's an independence of our states, right? That's why when you apply for insurance benefits, let's say you're on a panel for Blue Cross or Prudential or any one of those companies. It's Blue Cross of California, Blue Cross of Idaho, Blue Cross of Florida. It's not Blue Cross for the country. Why? Because those insurance companies have to pay attention to the state law. So they can't have one company be adhering to all these rules because a lot of times these rules conflict. See, so they have to have independent companies because that if insurance companies could have standardized this, they would have. I grew up in a real estate family, you see, and when you needed $1 million, you go to a bank. When you needed $10 million with the insurance companies have money in our country. And if they can't crack this state thing, we won't. Okay. And so the states do operate independently when it comes to their laws. Then the governor signs the law. Okay. And that applies to everybody. But the states have regulatory boards for each of these professions. And those regulatory boards can interpret that law that the governor signed for that profession. They could say you need to have 15 hours of supervised experience after licensure before you can sit the exam. Another state will say it's 1,000 or 750 or whatever. They can interpret the law that the governor signs. So that's why states are different, boards are different. Okay. And you have to think about the board. How many people are on your board? Not that many. You see, how sophisticated are they about telehealth? It's all over the place. So you don't really know until you ask. And those people make decisions that cannot be challenged very easily. Okay. Our associations, the psych associations, can lobby. They have lobbyists that try to go influence people, okay, influence decisions. But the board is the board, and they make the decisions, and they hold our meal tickets, our licenses. So there's not a whole lot of arguing is going to happen there, okay. Oh, you can argue, but it may not be heard. So the thing is for you to remember, the states can differ widely, state to state, for psychology, even just the profession of psychology. They can differ widely across boards within a state as well. So bottom line on this, talk to your board. That's why it's not easy to ask Marlene Mayhew or anybody else, hey, what can I do in this circumstance? Go to your board, okay? That will solve a lot of problems. And if you do it in email with a timestamp on it, at least you'll get an email, a timestamp back, and then you can prove that you had this exchange. Calling people from a board, not that effective. I've heard a lot of people have problems with that, okay? Now, some of these boards that are outside of yours can dominate. You see, um, I'll give you an example. Um, there are some boards that have psychology boards that have behavior analysts and psychoanalysts that are also regulated by that board. You see, and so there's an accommodation of the language there that may not be the kind of language that we understand, but is more accommodating these other professions. And then it sort of gets complicated. So that's one complication. Another one is that you might have a board like New Jersey where the decision makers we're only thinking of telemedicine. And so the law is written in terms of telemedicine. And that law rules the psychologists and the counselors and the MFTs and everybody in the state. Yet psychologists and counselors and MFTs are prohibited from practicing medicine. So there's a lack of, in essence, of internal consistency here, in terms of writing these laws. And, things are still in flux, and hopefully stuff will get sorted out. But it's confusing. It can be confusing to somebody reading this saying, well, I don't practice telemedicine, I practice telehealth, you see? So, which is the term that, telehealth, teletherapy is more common terms now than telebehavioral and, all these other terms. Okay, now also we see that language in one part of the code can contradict another part of the code, particularly in laws in states like California, which the psych board adopted the APA code as law. Okay, well, the APA code is it's a way to think through dilemmas. If you have this pressure and that pressure and they're conflicting, then you need to prioritize this or that, right? But what happens now in the California code is one section will literally contradict another section. So once again, lack of internal consistency in terms of being clear to the clinician. And that's why you may need to ask some questions to the board, okay? Now, there are some states that allow you to register with their board, which we'll get to later, but instead of licensure, but they'll give you a form. There's no email address for you to use. Georgia's is the case I'm talking about. The psychologist just told me about this when I consulted with them last month. They write to the board and they said, hey, this is what I want to do. And, it was a big thing on the board website. Yeah, you can just use this form and write to us. And, you need to let us know what you're doing. Great. This psychologist never got a response, didn't know if this was legal. Psychologist is in California where the law says you have to have a written acknowledgement, written permission to work in this other state. But the Georgia board's not responding. You see, so there's these people are still trying to work this stuff out. Best thing, send an email if you can, use their form, call people, just keep pounding until you get what you need so you can feel comfortable doing it. Okay. And then if you get a chance to talk to some of these board members, you might let them know things are maybe getting stuck on the way here. Okay. But most boards will answer in a few days if you do it in email. Otherwise, if you do paper, it could take months. Okay. And then some boards have members that are not psychologists. And so then you're up against that different terminology. All right. So this brings us to SIPAC. SIPAC is a model act that actually I helped them get this. I knew about the money that was available in Washington, and I called Steve Demers over at ASPPB, and I said, Steve, do you know there's a grant over there? And so he went and applied for it, and they got the money. And so they were able to set this up in 2011 is when they started. So that was exciting to see. They allow you to have permission to practice in these other states. That's the first of the 21, right? Is the permission to practice. Now it's on you to do all the rest of this. Boards define the standard of care. And a general term for that is the level and type of care that a professional who's reasonably competent and skilled with a similar background would have accomplished if they were in your shoes, okay? So what we're seeing is some boards are very clear. Other boards haven't even talked about telehealth, and they just let the clinician guess. Well, if you guess wrong, too bad, right? I mean, it is too bad. It's too bad for you because you don't have the specificity to know where to put your foot down. Should I do this or do that? It'd be nice for the boards to get together, but they're not. They haven't done that. I have heard that in some states, the different types of boards are starting to talk to one another. The counseling board and the social work board, psychology board members, they are getting together and trying to, deal with this in a different way. So that's good. Another area that they often differ on is the definition of a professional relationship. In some states, that professional relationship technically starts with the first contact. Okay. Even if it's I want to get to know you sort of contact. Other states, it's during the actual intake. Say, okay, well, let's do an intake. So the professional relationship starts there. In other states, it's when the informed consent document gets started. If you don't ask, you may not know. If you don't take the time to read the state law, you won't know. At our institute, we have a spreadsheet where we put columns and we've listed the different types of laws and encourage you to organize them by the types of state, the number of states you're in. Go find out each one of these types of things so you can have a clear roadmap of how to operate. Informed consent is another really big thing that differs across state lines. So they can differ widely. In California, you only need verbal consent. I was doing this talk a few months ago, and there was a person in the audience who didn't say it to me, and I didn't see it go through, but typed in the chat box, "Oh, I'm in California. We don't need to do informed consent." And then I saw it later when I read the transcript. I thought, "What? I wish they had asked me rather than just announcing this along with the hello, to everybody else in the group. Of course, you have to do informed consent. Informed consent is not just for the benefit of the client. It's for your benefit too. It protects you in a court of law. Actually, it's one of the few things that will protect you in a court of law. Why on earth would you not do that for telehealth? You see? So you want to have as much as you can in that informed consent. And you don't need to have it be all in one shot in the first session. You could have, you know, you do general video consent in the first one. If people want to start talking to you in text, well, that's known as dynamic informed consent, on the fly. Or you want to text. Well, let me tell you about texting, pros and cons, pros and cons, benefits, right? All of that. That's informed consent lingo. Well, then you write down in your notes, we did dynamic informed consent about tech, about email. I answered these questions. We did this and that, right? So there's a whole thing, there's a whole protocol on that. But you definitely want to have some form of informed consent that will protect you. Okay. You want to include your reimbursement policy, whether recording is appropriate. No, no, no. Don't let people record your sessions. Who knows? I could be recording this whole thing. You could be recording this whole thing, just the audio track. Mix and match all that later, and then bad things going to happen, right? Take your comments out of context. No recording of these sessions. What will you do for interruptions, disconnections, no shows? What are your policies? The usual informed consent, in addition to all the technologies and the pros and cons of the technology. Okay. We have an informed consent library that I'm making available to you as the URL, 50 clauses that you might want to consider putting in your informed consent. And when I would travel and do my 2-day workshops on telehealth, I would give this to people 15 minutes and I'd say, why don't you go ahead and read that, and then let's discuss, right? Which one do you want in your informed consent? And always somebody raise their hand, I want all 50, I want all 50, but you can't give them all 50 because they're going to run out of the door. You can throw all this legalese at people. So you have to, be reasonable about actually choosing the ones that are important. And I'm telling you, recording is a big one. Okay, definitely want to include that. Now, you see my numbers are not sequential because I'm having to skip over a bunch of different things. Let's go to reporting, mandated reporting. This is a very big deal, and it differs dramatically across states, okay? Child abuse and neglect. While all states require some type of reporting, the specifics can be different. What's their legal definition of child? Is it 18? Is it 16? Is it 21? You see? Do you report past abuse? Something happened 30 years ago? Do you report? Some states require you to. What if past abuse, if there are no children around that person now? You see, states can differ on that. Elder abuse is another one of what's even squishier, where it's physical, sexual, emotional, financial exploitation. Is typically mandatory, but the specifics can also differ by state. Now, duty to warn is a very big one that I didn't realize even that there was an issue with, because I was trained in California, where Tarasoff State. So, of course, I thought Tarasoff was everywhere. Well, no, there's not a duty to warn law in every state. Now, you see, in California, there's an insurance policy that protects the clinician who breaks confidentiality and reports in the intention to do harm to the police and the intended victim. We have insurance policy. So the client then says, well, I'm going to sue you. You harmed me. by telling this person I had talked about killing them, and that's not true. Uh, California, the insurance policy that'll protect me, that'll pick up the legal tab on that. Okay. Well, if there's no duty to warn law in a state, who's going to pick up that tab? You see? And if you didn't do this, if you weren't appropriately licensed and not following all the laws in the state, then you may be in violation of your malpractice policy. You see, because your malpractice policy says it will cover you for infractions as long as you don't break the law. But if you're practicing over state lines illegally, you're technically breaking the law. They may not cover you. So you see, you've got to be careful about following the law. All right. Now, what I want to point you to, just to prove my point, is there is a national conference of state legislators that track the duty to warn states. And here's the URL. Here's a screenshot of their website. And I put the URL here for you again. And here is a map where they're showing here there is a duty to protect, warn. Different states call it different things. Some states call it terrace off, but the green ones, yes. See, California, yes, there's a duty to warn. The blue is permissive. I'm not really sure what permissive means, but you'd have to look it up. And then the yellow ones, no, there's no duty to warn or protect. And I don't know what Georgia's doing, but apparently they don't either. So um, that's that. Okay. So you have to be aware of this. Another issue about mandated reporting is there are states like California, consumer protection state, that says if you, the clinician of today, hear that a client or a patient had a clinician in the past who was impaired due to drugs, illness, alcohol, or did improper billing, you need to report that to the board, to their board, to that clinician's board, right? And for sexual communications, you have to give the consumer not just a verbal statement, but a specific pamphlet called Therapy Never Includes Sexual Behavior. It's your duty to get this pamphlet to that client. You see, I just happen to know this one because I'm in California, but what other rules like this are in different states? So you need to understand the rules of the states you're going into. That's my message. Okay. And here's this regulation. And this also talks about some of the insurance and things here. So I just want that's just an example of the kinds of things you need to be aware of when you're practicing over state lines. Most of us know that different states have different continuing education requirements, but you have to be able to meet those requirements, and uh, they differ across states, and then from the professions it gets wild again. This continuing ed, very tough. I encourage you to, when you take a course like the one you're taking now, make a copy of the content. Keep your slide deck, because I have been contacted by attorneys of clinicians who get sued, and they'll say, "Oh, Dr. Mayhew, so and so, Dr. So and so took a course and with you, and now I'm defending them in court. Do you happen to have the outline of what this clinician learned?" Sure, then I can produce it because I keep all my records. But the reality is, you should keep your own records. You see, keep these slides so that you can say, "Look at, yeah, I learned all this stuff. I was there. Here, I got the certificate. I learned these things," so you can defend yourself better in court. Okay. Um, Now, cultural sensitivity, disability, language accommodations. I'm particularly sensitive to this because my family's French Canadian. My first language was French. And so I grew up in this bicultural world where I grew up in Connecticut, and the schools were English, but my religious training was different. My language, my culture was different, from infancy. And I'm aware of the nuances of how people were not sensitive to me and my family growing up, you see. And so I've always tried to bring this in. I'm so glad now that we have more structured um, training and suggestions for people that are working with other folks, because particularly with telehealth, we literally are catapulting ourselves into another corner of the state, into another state, another geographic region where people may look or sound like us, and we don't realize that they do have fundamental differences because we haven't asked. So you need to ask. Okay. We are mandated to deliver services that meet their needs and not ask them to teach us about their culture. You see, um, there are 7 areas that we need to pay attention to. I'm just going to list them here for you, but I do want, I don't have time to get into it all. This very short meeting here, but language, we are mandated to deliver services in the language of preference of the consumer in the United States and all 50 states. It's the federal law. Okay. And so if you're not doing that, there are interpretive services that are available for telehealth. And just, you hire one of these companies, they participate in the meeting with you as a third party, and you train them ahead of time as to what the sensitivities are for the population you're treating. This happens a lot in the medical world, and I've been waiting for people to adopt this more and more in our world because we talk about very sensitive issues. And oftentimes people do not understand what we say. And having grown up in another culture, I will tell you, they may not tell you they don't understand you. Okay. They'll just nod their head and say, yeah, yeah, yeah. I have no idea what you said or what the implications are of the decisions you're asking them to make. And that's not fair to them. So we need to be more sensitive and to include more of these types of services. Now, this is an essential aspect of telehealth. Your screening procedures may need to pick this up. Maybe your informed consent, your intake form needs to have more questions about this, okay, to kind of tease out with the population you serve. We all serve different populations, right? But for the people you serve, the general pool of people, you can identify some questions that will help you figure out what added services might be needed. You might need to have a good referral data bank that you can send people to and be responsible about this. Know how to handle emergencies in their culture with their belief systems. They may not want to go to the emergency room. You see, they may not want to make a big deal out of what's going on for them. So you've got to be sensitive to a lot of this. And note that complaints involving cultural bias are some of the most frequently recorded by boards. So this is not just maybe you ought to. This is a you have to kind of thing. And also pay attention to the disparities in groups. I know that in my group, I was the only one to go to college, never mind grad school. And when I would go home, I would automatically flip into a much simpler form of English because if I would start using words with 3 or 4 syllables, my family would call me out. I wouldn't be aware of it. You're surrounded by that in grad school, but then I would go home and I would, one of these things would sneak out and they go, ooh, aren't you fancy, Marlene? I mean, they would, pull me back in line, but there's a whole different language that happens here. And if we come off all highfalutin, they're not going to understand us and they're going to shut down in many cases. Okay. So you have to be aware of this. Also be aware of their digital literacy. I had a fella call me this morning. I got call my company this morning, and my manager told me about this. Uh, he wanted somebody to be on the phone with him while he was logging into the website to try to find one of our courses. This doesn't happen that often, but just wanted someone to be on the phone, So we give them that service, but that usually is a person who's not digitally literate, doesn't feel confident logging into a site and looking for what's there. Younger people may not think that's a big deal, but people in my generation, oftentimes there's a reluctance and, there's an overwhelm factor. And so that's true of the people we serve as well. See, if it happens to us with all our education, it definitely happen with them. They may not have their own device. They may be using their nephew's device and now he's off to college, you see, and they don't have one. So they try making do with their phone, you see, so it gets complicated. Then, of course, local expressions might mean something very different than what you think they mean. So you have to educate yourself about these things. Okay. Telehealth poses unique challenges because a lot of times people present from the head up. One thing you can do is when you're online with somebody, show somebody. Okay. You've got shoulders, you've got a torso. So interact like a human being and don't just show up with a head or just eyes. I've seen people show up on camera like this is the fan going over it. Bring yourself so they can experience you as a full being. Okay. Then it's a lot easier to ask them to do it. And you will see a very big difference in your interaction. Or you could tell if someone's tensing up or not, right? But if you just see the neck up, then you can't tell a lot of things that many of us have been trained to identify when we're working with people. So these things make a much bigger difference than you would imagine. I just did a series of journal articles about technology fatigue and how easy it is for us to get tired when we're working. Well, yeah, especially if you're working with people, who's you only see their eyes and you don't have the gumption, you haven't given yourself the permission to reach into that room and say, would you please lower your laptop, or if they're using a phone, would you please put your phone in a wide mouth cup so it's stabilized and not flopping all over the room. And then it's very tiring if you can't stabilize their connection. You've got to give yourself permission to go in there and stabilize them. And a lot of people from other cultures may be much more reticent with that, or the technology is not reliable. And so you've got that overlay to deal with. Okay. But you have to make those bridges. And so the fact that you don't know how to do telehealth is irrelevant if you continue doing it. It's like the fact that you never learned to drive a car is irrelevant if you hit somebody with a car, right? So you shouldn't be driving if you don't know how to do it. So you should take driver's ed. It's not that complicated, but you oftentimes need somebody to walk you through the paces. You go, oh, yeah, okay. If I'd have stopped long enough to think about it, I'd have known that. But I'm so busy flying around, I didn't stop to think about that. So that's the purpose of training, is to help you remember to do certain things that you probably already know you should, but you don't know where the resources are, you haven't taken the time. Okay. All right. So another thing to focus on, number 20 in my list, is the definition of telehealth. Okay. Some states have specific regulations about the modalities. You can use video, you can use audio or telephone. You can't use email. You can't use faxing. You can't use texting. It differs. Okay. I just did a presentation for the Florida Psych Association and of psychology. Yeah. And they can't use email there. All right. But they can use text. Phone is a little bit confusing because, Medicare now pays for telephone services. They will pay for telehealth by telephone only. Amazing. And that's permanent reimbursement. That's not something that's going to get repealed. So, there are things, and that's the federal level, that's Medicare. So when Florida says, there are ins and outs about telephone, then some of the problems I've seen is some of the boards have regulations that frankly don't make sense. So they need a little training too. But and then what do you do if you're a licensee under that board? The only thing you could do is very politely ask questions and be the pebble in the shoe. Be the pebble in the shoe of the board that asks intelligent questions to get them to think that maybe this needs to be revised. Okay. Um, Also, I've seen some states that literally name telehealth companies as being appropriate. That kind of blew my mind. But, this company's okay, that one's not. Okay. Once again, you can't fight the board. You can't fight the board all that easily, right? So what they say, you've got to pay attention to. Okay. But take a look. If you go to a state website for psychology, the psychology board, all that stuff related to telehealth, you can search very easily. You do a control or command on your keyboard, F, okay, the letter F, it'll open a little search bar and you just type in telehealth, telepractice, telemental health, tele will do it actually, tele, and you'll see everything come up on that page related to that. You see, so that will help you get through a lot of that legalese. And if there's a code section that says it applies to all these things except for this, and they give you a link. Well, click the link. All right, go read that. Because if you do that, it'd probably take you an hour. This is not rocket science. These laws usually are written in plain English. There are laws that require laws to be written in plain English now. So, it's a lot easier than it was 10, 20 years ago. But it won't take you 30 hours to get through this. Okay. Now, let me talk to you about registration, because registration has been around forever, right? So, licensing in the United States, particularly for psychology, started in the 50s, 1950s. Then the board started looking at, well, gee, some folks go over state lines. You might live in a tri-state area, and so you go over the bridge and you practice there, or then you have another office on the other side in another state. So the boards had these laws called registration that allowed you to go sign up for these other states as long as you were licensed in your home state, okay, or some state, licensed in some state. So it was much more fluid, and they would allow the number of days, like you could do it for 30 days, 45 days, 90 days, different by state, right? But you don't need to get licensed in all 50 states. And if your state's not a SIPAC state, you can still ask, is there a registration period for the state that you want to go into? Okay. Some states it was a geographic difference, a distance thing, because it was that tri-state sort of arrangement where 5 miles over the border, yeah, you could practice. They were not gonna, that other state was not gonna do anything about it. It was okay, right? But you want that in writing. And nowadays, this 30, 45, 90, whatever it is, usually refers, they're interpreting that as contacts. So you can't open a second office and start inviting 30 clients there, because your 30 might be used up with the limit that board will give you. So 30 contacts. If they say 30 days, then in telehealth language, it probably means 30 contacts. So, you can't even see somebody weekly for a year with that. But it was designed to help bridge these occasional things that would happen for folks. Okay. So we're going to talk about international practice a little bit, and then I'll open it up to questions. You have to think about where you will be and the person you serve. Okay. If your feet are on US soil, then that's quite different than if you're the one that's traveling around the Himalayas. Okay. So you've got to think about your licensure typically follows you. And you can serve people that you're licensed to serve in California, wherever your license is, most of the time. All right. But you do need to check with the boards before you take anything like this for granted. You have to ask. But most of the time, if you're licensed to serve people in California, doesn't matter where your body is, you can serve people in California. Okay. Now, if you're serving somebody in another country, you've got to see, does that country have a licensing board? And if so, can you contact them? Well, they may not speak English, although most countries do speak English like a business language. So if you are unsure, you could talk to the APA, right? You could contact the US Embassy in that country. The US has an embassy from all the countries that they recognize as independent countries. So you go to their embassy person and say, hey, do you have the people I can contact as the health ministry or health department? They have different names for these. You go to their websites, you can look up websites, health department, Czechoslovakia, right? And then you can usually on those websites, there's a translation button and you could translate it into English. And then you could see who you can contact, and you write them a letter and you say, hey, my clients moved to Czechoslovakia. Can I work with them? Okay. There's no one solution to this, but that's the best I've been able to find. Okay. What I do know is that ignorance is not a defense in the face of the law, right? If you get caught speeding, you can't say, well, I didn't see the speed sign. Too bad. You were speeding. And that's the same thing with licensure. It's you need to make it your business to find these things out, or at least be able to prove that you tried what a reasonable professional would have done in a similar circumstance, the standard of care that we talked about earlier, right? But many countries do require a licensing in their country. And in some countries, like Japan for psychology, you've got to go sit in Japan and take the local exam in Japanese. So it's not just, oh, yeah, I'm going to willy nilly practice anywhere I want. Okay. Because once again, your malpractice policy may not help you if you're practicing illegally. Okay. Um, the burden on proof is on you to prove that you did the right thing. Okay. Um, I'm going to speed forward. Let's say Portugal here. Okay. If you, I wrote a little case for you. We're not going to get into the details of it, but I want to encourage you to have a look at it in terms of I asked the questions and I gave you the answers. What I do want you to know is that practice certainly is possible. It requires some work, but hey, most of us have advanced training. We know how to do work. And so I want to encourage you to try it. If you want free resources, at the end of my deck, you'll see there's a way, free newsletters. This is where you go, telehealth.org, sign up. And I encourage you to stay in touch. And I'm open to answering any of your questions. Now, I'm going to go back up to the top and see where the questions are in here for me. And I will stay a few minutes after, but those of you that need to go at the end of the hour, you've met your requirements and you're free to go. When is it okay to practice across state lines and internationally? Well, hopefully I've covered a lot of that once you do your homework and you figure out what the rules are and you can document that you comply with them, then you can do that. Some people say, oh yeah, but Marlene, I wanted to know what diagnoses, that I can, well, that's a clinical issue. It's not a practice issue. So, billing issues, clinical issues, these are separate from what we're talking about. How do you keep track of ethical differences on a spreadsheet? You go to each state and you say, like Nebraska, all right, this is I've given you the 21 categories now. You could start there. There probably are more. If you find more, write to me, Marlene at telehealth.org, and let me know, hey, I found a number 22 here. Okay. But then you just say, this is what I have to do, right? When a client is in crisis and wants to stay, my client takes me months to get licensed there. Yeah, there's no solution to that outside of keep pounding on the board and saying, hey, I wrote, this is my 5th time. What I do is I just do, I'll take the message I already did, I send it again, and I'll put second reminder, like kind reminder, gentle reminder, number 3, number 4, to kind of get the message of, hey, I've been trying to reach you. It feels like a lot to know for each state. Yeah, it is a lot to know for each state. That's why I don't think that, shotgunning your services, one client here, one there, one there, one there. I mean, I wouldn't do it. I don't think it's worth it, but you might. So it's up to you. I'm just teaching you how to do it, but there's no easy way to get around this stuff. Okay. Managing risk situations, clinical issue, the whole protocols on how to deal with emergencies. Basically, it boils down to preventing them. How to prevent emergencies in telehealth is where the action is. So we have training for that. Pro bono, uninsured, whether you get money for doing work or not is irrelevant. You still have to comply with all the rules. Okay. Be a lot easier if things happen. Yeah, it'd be a lot easier if the boards would talk to each other and get one standardized thing. But I think SciPact is the first step on that. And you see now that was 2011 that got started. So stuff takes time. College students, love this question. Many college administrators require in-house clinicians, like in a counseling department, to see people over state lines. So here's how I've encouraged people to deal with it. Write to the APA ethics board and write to the licensing boards in question and say, hey, my administrator is requiring me to do this. What should I say? All right. And then you get the statement from, and you will get very detailed in most cases, very well thought out responses. And then you show it to the administrator and say, please tell me what I should do. Okay. Because legally, you are mandated to follow state law. And if your employer, and to negotiate with your employer, and if your employer won't, the ethics of this is you need to leave that job. You can't work in a situation that is unethical and say, oh, to the ethics board, well, I'm sorry, my employer told me I need. No, it doesn't work that way. You're the licensed professional. You're responsible to do the right thing and to educate all these people around you. And that's what these letters do, and it gets you out of the middle. not completely, but at least somewhat. Okay, so it's a reasonable response to the situation. And then talk to the lawyers involved, talk to your malpractice attorney, psychology. Deborah Baker over at the APA has done a wonderful job leading up the whole legal team to deal with technology. Shall I keep going, Chris?
I
A few
think we
more?
can leave it there unless there's
Okay.
some folks have like a final question they want to send to you, or perhaps we'll certainly distribute the slides after the presentation is finished today, and that will include your contact information. So if
But
folks
just for you to
have
know,
something,
I don't have time to sit around and answer people's questions about everything under the sun.
right,
Please. Okay.
right, right,
I've
right. No,
contracted to
what I
come
was
here
going
and
to
do
say is that
this.
they
And
could,
yeah,
right, and they could avail themselves of your institute's resources and consider receiving your newsletter and other resources as well. So
that'd be reasonable. Yeah.
um,
Thank you.
yeah. Um, all right, then. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mayhew, for being here with us and presenting this information. I hope folks found it to be really helpful. I posted in the chat again all of the information about the CE credits that I read off at the beginning of the presentation today. So be on the lookout for that email within the next couple of weeks with further follow-up regarding your CEs. And again, if you haven't already voted in the APA and SCP elections, I really encourage you all to do so. And thanks so much again, Dr. Mayhew. I really
My
appreciate it. I know
pleasure. I
everybody
hope
else
this
here
was
does as
helpful to
well.
everybody. Okay.
Definitely.
Take care. Bye now.
Thanks, everybody.